I never thought my life would change so drastically that day in the forest. It was just another ordinary afternoon for me. A poor, struggling guy trying to make ends meet by collecting firewood to sell at the local market. My clothes were patched up, my shoes had holes, and my stomach growled like an angry beast because I hadn't eaten much all day. But still, I dragged myself into the woods, hoping to gather enough wood to earn a few coins. The forest was eerily quiet that day, except for the occasional rustle of leaves or chirping birds high above. As I bent down to pick up a fallen branch, I heard something strange, a faint cry, almost drowned out by the wind. At first, I thought it might be an animal trapped somewhere, but then I heard it again, clearer this time. Help! Please, someone help me. My heart skipped a beat. Who could possibly be out here? This part of the forest wasn't exactly known for visitors. Only hunters and desperate souls like me ever ventured this far. Still, without hesitation, I dropped my sack of firewood and ran toward the sound. Each step felt heavier than the last as fear gripped me. What if it was dangerous? What if I couldn't do anything to help? Finally, after what seemed like forever, I reached a clearing where the ground dipped slightly. And there it was, a deep hole, hidden beneath overgrown bushes. Peering inside, I saw her, a woman, maybe in her late 20s, clinging desperately to a root jutting out from the side of the pit. Her face was pale with terror, her hands trembling as she tried to hold on. She looked up at me with wide, tear-filled eyes. "Oh, thank God you're here," she gasped, her voice cracking under the weight of panic. "I've been stuck here for hours." I froze for a moment, overwhelmed by the situation. How did she even end up here? Why was she alone in such a desolate place? None of those questions mattered right now, though. All that mattered was getting her out safely. "I'll get you out," I said firmly, trying to mask my own fear. "Just hang on tight." But how? The hole was deeper than I'd imagined, its walls steep and slippery. There were no ropes nearby, no tools to assist me. For a brief second, despair threatened to take over, but I pushed it away. I couldn't give up, not when someone's life depended on me. Little did I know, this rescue would set off a chain of events that would alter both our lives forever. I knelt by the edge of the hole, my mind racing as I tried to figure out what to do. The woman, her name was Emma, she told me between sobs, was clinging to that root for dear life, her fingers white from the strain. Her breaths came in short, panicked gasps, and every time she shifted, small clumps of dirt tumbled down into the darkness below. "I can't hold on much longer," she whimpered, her voice trembling. "Please hurry." My heart pounded like a drum in my chest. I didn't have any equipment, no rope or ladder, nothing that could make this easier. All I had were my bare hands and sheer determination. I scanned the area frantically, searching for anything I could use. A sturdy branch, vines, anything. But the forest seemed cruelly unhelpful, offering only dead leaves and brittle twigs. "Stay calm," I said, trying to sound confident even though my insides were churning. "I'm going to get you out of there, okay? Just don't let go." She nodded weakly, tears streaming down her face. It broke my heart to see her like that, so scared, so helpless. I couldn't imagine how terrified she must have felt, trapped in that dark pit with no one around but the sound of her own ragged breathing. Then it hit me. An idea sparked in my mind. I quickly tore off my belt, which was old and worn but still strong enough to hold some weight. If I could loop it around a tree trunk nearby and lower myself partway into the hole, maybe I could reach her. It wasn't a perfect plan, but it was all I had. "Listen carefully," I told her, my voice steady now. "I'm going to try to reach you. When I say grab, you grab onto me as hard as you can, all right?" She nodded again, biting her lip to keep from crying out. I tied one end of the belt tightly around a thick tree root protruding from the ground, testing its strength before looping the other end around my waist. My hands shook as I secured the makeshift harness, but I forced myself to focus. There was no room for error here. If I messed up, we'd both be in trouble. Slowly, cautiously, I lowered myself over the edge of the hole, using the belt to brace myself against the crumbling soil. The descent was terrifying. The walls of the pit loomed close, damp and unstable, and every movement sent more dirt cascading downward. I gritted my teeth, ignoring the sting of grit in my eyes and the ache in my arms as I stretched toward her. "I'm almost there," I called out, my voice strained. "Just a little farther." Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I was close enough. "Grab," I shouted, extending my hand as far as I could. Emma reached up with the last ounce of strength she had left, her fingers brushing mine before slipping away. Panic surged through me, but I refused to give up. "Again," I urged, leaning further down despite the protest of my muscles. This time, our hands locked together, and I pulled with everything I had, yanking her upward just as the root she'd been holding onto snapped free with a sickening crack. For a split second, we were both suspended in midair, gravity threatening to drag us both into the abyss below. But then, with a desperate heave, I managed to haul her up high enough for her to scramble onto solid ground. We collapsed together, panting and shaking, our bodies trembling not just from exhaustion, but from the sheer relief of survival. "You saved me," Emma whispered, her voice hoarse but filled with gratitude. She looked at me like I was some kind of hero, though I knew I was anything but. I was just a poor guy who happened to be in the right place at the right time. But as we sat there, catching our breath, I noticed something glinting faintly on her wrist, a gold bracelet encrusted with diamonds. It caught the sunlight, sparkling like stars against the dull earth. For a moment, I forgot about everything else, mesmerized by its beauty. Little did I know, that tiny detail would soon unravel a world I never dreamed existed. As we sat there on the forest floor, catching our breaths and trying to steady our racing hearts, I couldn't stop staring at that bracelet. It wasn't just fancy, it was extravagant. The kind of thing you'd see in magazines or behind glass cases in high-end jewelry stores, not out here in the middle of nowhere. My mind raced with questions, but I didn't dare ask them yet. After all, she had just been through something traumatic, and prying into her life felt wrong. Emma must have noticed my gaze because she pulled her sleeve down slightly, covering the bracelet as if she suddenly remembered it was there. Her cheeks flushed, and for a moment, she looked almost embarrassed. But then she smiled weakly at me, her gratitude shining through despite her obvious discomfort. "Thank you," she said again, her voice softer now but no less sincere. "You saved my life. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't come along." I waved off her thanks awkwardly, scratching the back of my neck. "It's nothing, really. Anyone would have done the same." But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Not everyone would risk their own safety to save a stranger, especially someone like me, someone who barely had 2 coins to rub together. Still, I didn't say anything more. Instead, I helped her stand up, brushing the dirt off her clothes as best I could. She winced when she put weight on her left ankle, and I realized she might have twisted it during the fall. "Can you walk?" I asked, concern creeping into my voice. She hesitated, testing her footing carefully before nodding. "I think so, but slowly." "All right, let's get you out of here," I said firmly, offering her my arm for support. She leaned on me heavily, and I did my best to ignore how awkward it felt. The closeness, the unfamiliarity of helping someone so different from me. We began making our way back toward the edge of the forest, where I'd left my sack of firewood. The sun was starting to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the ground. The air grew cooler, and I worried about Emma's condition. She was still trembling, though whether from shock or cold, I couldn't tell. "You shouldn't be out here alone," I muttered after a while, unable to keep my curiosity at bay any longer. "What were you doing in the forest anyway?" She hesitated, glancing away as if debating how much to share. Finally, she sighed and said, "I got lost. I was hiking earlier, and, well, I guess I wandered too far off the trail. One wrong step, and," she trailed off, shuddering at the memory. Her explanation made sense, but something about it didn't sit right with me. There was a nervousness in her tone, a flicker of hesitation that hinted at more than she was letting on. Before I could press further, however, we reached the clearing where I'd abandoned my belongings earlier. That's when things took an unexpected turn. A sleek black car came speeding down the narrow dirt path leading into the woods, its tires kicking up clouds of dust. Both Emma and I froze, startled by the sudden intrusion. Who on earth would drive out here? And why? The car screeched to a halt a few feet away, and two men in suits jumped out, their faces tense with urgency. They scanned the area quickly before spotting us, their expressions shifting instantly from worry to relief. "Miss Caldwell," one of them exclaimed, rushing over to Emma, "we've been looking everywhere for you. Are you hurt?" Caldwell. The name rang a bell, though I couldn't quite place it at first. But as they fussed over her, checking her ankle, wrapping a jacket around her shoulders, I finally pieced it together. Caldwell. Wasn't that the name of one of the wealthiest families in the country? The ones who owned half the businesses in the city and had properties scattered across the globe? My jaw dropped as realization dawned on me. This woman, this seemingly ordinary hiker I'd rescued, wasn't just rich. She was filthy rich. A millionaire. Maybe even a billionaire. Emma glanced at me apologetically, clearly sensing my shock. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner," she murmured, her voice tinged with guilt. "I didn't want to make things complicated." Complicated? That was an understatement. My head spun as I tried to process everything. Here I was, a poor guy who lived hand to mouth, standing next to someone whose last name probably opened doors I couldn't even dream of walking through. And yet, none of that mattered to her in that moment. As the men ushered her toward the car, she turned back to me, her eyes filled with genuine gratitude. "Please," she said softly, "come with us. Let me repay you for what you've done." Repay me? I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it all. What could she possibly give me that would change my life? Money? A job? Some token of appreciation? None of it seemed real. But before I could respond, the driver stepped forward, holding the car door open for her. Emma hesitated, waiting for my answer, and for reasons I couldn't fully explain. Not logic, not pride, but something deeper. I nodded. "Okay," I said quietly, surprising even myself. "I'll come." Little did I know, this decision would set off a chain reaction of events that would leave me questioning everything I thought I knew about wealth, kindness, and the meaning of true gratitude. The ride back to civilization was surreal, like stepping into a dream. Or maybe a movie. The car smelled of leather and polish, something so foreign to me that I couldn't help but shift uncomfortably in my seat. My patched-up clothes felt out of place against the pristine interior, and every bump in the road made me hyper-aware of how much dirt I was probably leaving behind on the immaculate upholstery. Emma sat across from me, her ankle propped up on a cushion provided by one of the men who had arrived, her security team, as they referred to themselves. She looked exhausted but relieved, her earlier panic replaced by a quiet calm. Every now and then, she'd glance at me, her eyes soft with gratitude. It was unnerving, to say the least. How could someone like her look at someone like me with such respect? "Where are we going?" I finally asked, breaking the silence. My voice sounded strange even to my own ears, rough and hesitant compared to the smooth tones of the men in suits. "To my estate," Emma replied simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "It's not far from here. I want to make sure you're taken care of after everything you've done." Her words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Taken care of? What did that even mean? A hot meal? A shower? Or something more permanent? I didn't dare ask, afraid of sounding ungrateful or greedy. Instead, I nodded stiffly, clutching the edge of the seat as the car sped along winding roads lined with towering trees. When we finally emerged from the forest, the landscape changed dramatically. Gone were the dense woods and muddy paths. Instead, we entered a world of manicured lawns, sprawling mansions, and gated driveways. The contrast was staggering, almost dizzying. I pressed my face closer to the window, trying to take it all in without being too obvious about it. And then we arrived. The Caldwell estate was unlike anything I'd ever seen before. A massive iron gate swung open automatically as we approached, revealing a long driveway flanked by perfectly trimmed hedges and fountains that sparkled in the fading sunlight. At the end of the drive stood the house, or rather, the mansion. It was enormous, with grand columns, sweeping balconies, and windows that reflected the golden hues of dusk like mirrors. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't just wealth. It was opulence on a scale I couldn't comprehend. For a moment, I wondered if I should have stayed in the forest. At least there, I knew where I stood. Here, I felt completely out of my depth. "This is home," Emma said softly, noticing my wide-eyed expression. There was no arrogance in her tone, only a quiet pride mixed with something else. Sadness, perhaps? Longing? I couldn't tell. We stepped out of the car, and immediately, a flurry of activity surrounded us. Servants appeared seemingly out of nowhere, offering drinks, towels, and polite inquiries about our well-being. One woman led Emma inside to tend to her ankle, while another turned to me, gesturing toward a side entrance. "If you'll follow me, sir," she said politely, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of curiosity. Clearly, I wasn't the usual type of guest here. I followed her reluctantly, feeling more self-conscious with each step. She brought me to a small but luxurious room. A guest suite, she called it, and left me with fresh clothes and instructions to clean up before dinner. Dinner? With Emma Caldwell? The idea seemed absurd, yet here I was, standing in a bathroom bigger than my entire apartment, staring at myself in a mirror framed by gold. As the water ran hot in the shower, I stripped off my dirty clothes and let them fall to the floor in a heap. The steam rose around me, warm and soothing, but it did little to ease the storm brewing in my mind. Who was I kidding? I didn't belong here. This was a world I'd only glimpsed in passing, through glossy magazine covers and whispered stories of privilege. Yet somehow, fate, or maybe dumb luck, had dropped me right into the middle of it. After scrubbing away the grime of the forest, I wrapped myself in a plush robe and stared at the pile of clothes left for me. They were simple but expensive-looking, tailored slacks, a crisp white shirt, and a dark blazer. Hesitantly, I put them on, marveling at how different they felt compared to my usual rags. In these clothes, I almost looked like I belonged here. Almost. But appearances were deceiving, and I knew it. No matter what I wore, I was still the same poor guy who'd spent his days collecting firewood to survive. And yet, as I made my way downstairs to meet Emma for dinner, I couldn't shake the feeling that tonight might change everything. Little did I know, the surprises were only beginning. The dining room was unlike anything I'd ever seen. A long, polished table stretched across the space, adorned with candles, crystal glasses, and silverware that gleamed under the soft glow of a chandelier hanging from the ceiling. The walls were lined with paintings, real ones, not prints, and fresh flowers filled vases at every corner. It was overwhelming, to say the least. Emma sat at one end of the table, her ankle now wrapped neatly in a bandage. She wore an elegant dress that accentuated her grace, though she still looked tired. When she saw me enter, her face lit up with a warm smile, and she gestured for me to sit across from her. "You look different," she said gently, her eyes scanning me from head to toe. "Cleaner." I chuckled nervously, tugging at the collar of the shirt. "Yeah, well, it's not every day I get to wear something this fancy." She laughed softly, and for a moment, the tension eased. But as servants began bringing out course after course of food, dishes I couldn't even pronounce, I felt more out of place than ever. Here I was, eating lobster and sipping wine, while just hours ago, I'd been wondering where my next meal would come from. "This is too much," I admitted finally, setting down my fork. "You didn't have to go through all this trouble for me." Emma leaned forward slightly, her expression serious. "It's the least I can do. You saved my life, remember? Most people wouldn't have risked themselves like that." "I wasn't thinking about risking myself," I replied honestly. "I just reacted. Anyone would have done the same." She shook her head firmly. "No, they wouldn't. And that's why I want to repay you properly. Not just with a meal or a change of clothes, but with something meaningful." Her words sent a chill down my spine. Meaningful? What could she possibly mean? Before I could ask, she continued. "My family has resources, connections, that could help you turn your life around. Education, job opportunities, housing, whatever you need. All I ask is that you let me help." I stared at her, stunned. Was she serious? Offering me a way out of poverty, a chance to escape the cycle of struggle I'd been trapped in for years? It sounded too good to be true. Yet there was no hint of mockery or condescension in her voice, only genuine sincerity. "I don't know what to say," I murmured, my throat tight with emotion. "This is incredible. But why? Why would you do this for someone like me?" Emma hesitated, her gaze dropping to her plate for a moment before meeting mine again. "Because I owe you. Because kindness should never go unrewarded. And because," she paused, her voice growing softer, "because maybe helping you will remind me of who I used to be before all this." She gestured vaguely to the lavish surroundings. Her confession caught me off guard. Beneath the wealth and privilege, Emma seemed lost, yearning for something simpler, perhaps even longing for connection. For the first time, I realized that money didn't shield her from pain or loneliness. If anything, it might have made things worse. "All right," I said quietly, surprising myself with my own resolve. "If you're sure, then thank you. I won't forget this." Emma smiled, and for the first time since we'd met, she looked truly happy. But as the evening wore on and the conversation turned lighter, I couldn't shake the nagging thought that accepting her offer came with strings attached. Strings I wasn't prepared to deal with. Over the next few days, Emma kept her promise. She introduced me to her personal assistant, a sharp-eyed woman named Clara, who helped arrange interviews for jobs and scholarships at prestigious institutions. At first, I resisted the idea of going back to school. I was in my late 20s, after all, but Emma insisted that education was the key to lasting change. "It's never too late to start over," she told me one afternoon as we strolled through the gardens behind the mansion. "Trust me, I've seen people transform their lives completely with the right opportunities." Her optimism was infectious, and slowly, I began to believe her. Still, adjusting to this new world wasn't easy. The Caldwell estate felt like its own universe, with rules and expectations I didn't understand. Servants moved silently through the halls, avoiding eye contact. Security guards patrolled the grounds day and night. Even the air smelled different, cleaner, somehow, but also colder. Then there was Emma herself. While she remained kind and generous, I noticed subtle changes in her demeanor. She grew quieter, more reserved, especially when other members of her family visited. Her father, Mr. Caldwell, was a stern man with piercing eyes who barely acknowledged my presence. Her mother, Mrs. Caldwell, treated me with polite indifference, clearly disapproving of her daughter's decision to bring a stranger into their home. One evening, during a formal dinner hosted by the Caldwells, I found myself seated awkwardly among guests who spoke of investments, mergers, and vacations in places I'd only heard of. I tried to blend in, nodding along and offering vague responses when addressed, but it was clear I didn't belong. Some of the guests shot me curious glances, whispering behind their hands. Others ignored me entirely. Emma noticed my discomfort and excused herself early, pulling me aside once we were out of earshot. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice tinged with guilt. "I didn't think about how overwhelming this would be for you. Maybe I moved too fast." "No, it's fine," I lied, forcing a smile. "Really, I just need time to adjust." But deep down, I wondered if I'd made a mistake. This world wasn't built for someone like me, and no amount of charity could erase the divide between us. Worse still, I started to question Emma's motives. Was she genuinely trying to help me, or was I merely a project, a distraction from her own unhappiness? Before I could confront these doubts, another unexpected event threw everything into chaos. Late one night, as I lay awake in the guest suite, I heard a noise outside my window, a faint scraping sound, followed by footsteps crunching on gravel. My instincts kicked in immediately, honed by years of living in unsafe neighborhoods. Grabbing the baseball bat Emma had jokingly given me for protection, I crept to the window and peered outside. A shadowy figure darted across the lawn, heading straight for the mansion. My heart raced. Was this an intruder, or part of the security team conducting a routine patrol? Either way, I couldn't ignore it. Slipping out of my room, I followed the figure cautiously, keeping to the shadows. He, or she, moved quickly, slipping through a side door that led to the kitchen. I hesitated, torn between calling for help and confronting them myself. In the end, curiosity won out. Inside, the house was eerily quiet, the hum of appliances the only sound breaking the silence. I tiptoed through the darkened corridors, my grip tightening on the bat. Then I heard voices, low and urgent, coming from the library. Peeking through the cracked door, I saw the intruder, a man in a hoodie, talking heatedly with none other than Emma. She looked terrified, clutching a letter in her trembling hands. "What do you want?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "How did you find me?" "I warned you," the man hissed, stepping closer. "You can't run forever, Emma. Your family owes us, and we're here to collect." My blood ran cold. Who was this guy? And what did he mean by "your family owes us"? Before I could process further, the man lunged at Emma, grabbing her wrist. Without thinking, I burst into the room, swinging the bat with all my strength. The intruder stumbled back, startled, giving Emma enough time to break free. She screamed for security, and within seconds, armed guards flooded the room, restraining the man and dragging him away. Breathing heavily, I turned to Emma, who was pale and shaking. "Are you okay?" I asked, lowering the bat. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she whispered. Again. But as the adrenaline faded, questions swirled in my mind. What had just happened? And why did I feel like I was being pulled deeper into a mystery I wasn't ready to solve? The next morning, Emma called me to her private study, a cozy room filled with books and photographs. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, but determined. "I owe you an explanation," she began, her voice steady despite her obvious fatigue. "That man last night, he's part of a group threatening my family. They claim we owe them money, but it's more complicated than that. My father made some bad deals years ago, and now they're using those debts to blackmail us." I listened intently, my stomach sinking with each revelation. This wasn't just about wealth or privilege. It was about danger, secrets, and power struggles I couldn't fully grasp. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked, frustration creeping into my tone. "I didn't want to involve you," she admitted. "But after last night, I realize I can't keep shutting people out. I need allies, people I can trust." Her words struck a chord. Despite everything, I cared about her. Not because of her money, but because she had shown me kindness when I least expected it. And now, she needed my help. "Okay," I said firmly. "Tell me what I can do." Over the following weeks, Emma and I worked together to uncover the truth behind the threats. With the help of a trusted lawyer and a private investigator, we pieced together evidence proving that the so-called debt was fabricated, a scheme designed to extort money from the Caldwells. Through it all, our bond deepened. We weren't just rescuer and rescued anymore. We were partners, united by shared adversity. For the first time, I felt like I belonged, not because of wealth, but because of trust and mutual respect. When the culprits were finally exposed and arrested, Emma turned to me with tears in her eyes. "We did it," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "Together." In the aftermath, Emma offered me a permanent position within her foundation, dedicated to helping others escape poverty. It was a role I accepted gratefully, knowing I could make a real difference. As for us, Emma and I chose to take things slow. Our relationship evolved naturally, built on honesty and understanding rather than obligation or pity. Together, we proved that kindness transcends class, and that sometimes saving someone else can save yourself too. And so, my life changed forever, not because of riches, but because of the courage to embrace second chances.